Welcome, everybody, to the Good Data Podcast. We have a great guest for you today. Garrick Sturgill will be on the show. Garrick is Senior Director at IsoFusion, which, if you haven't heard of it, is a co-location cloud and networking company in the Pacific Northwest. He works in strategy and planning for network build-outs, which include last-mile fiber to the home, which is a business that we can use a lot more competition in my opinion, so I'm glad to see them moving into that market. Our conversation goes all over the place, from the beginnings of the internet and ARPANET through Garrick's work in the iconic Westin building in Seattle, all the way up to the current bleeding edge of networking and low Earth orbit satellites. Garrick packs a huge amount of knowledge into a very approachable package, and I was so happy to have him on the show. Let's go! Garrick, thank you for coming on the program.
For sure.
So I really wanted to talk to you because you're someone who is steeped in every level of internet history, in that, you've been involved in the Westin building and building up some of the backbone of infrastructure and then moving on to data center operations and things like that. So I feel like you've touched every part of the stack, and that's what I'm interested in. So I really appreciate being able to talk to you.
Yeah, just don't ask me any VMware questions.
That's fine. Yeah, that's not really my forte either. So I'd just like to start with your background. So what was your first job in networking when you first started?
Oh, my first job in networking. Well, first official job was probably working for my parents. My parents were a part owner of a computer store up in Seattle called Ballard Computers, and they sold PCs, not necessarily, no Macs. Well, I shouldn't say that. No, they sold, I believe they sold Mac, but so we had like a pseudo ragtag enterprise division, to where you go and you do installs. My stepdad at the time actually ran the service department for the company. So clients would come in and then naturally they would need other stuff done in their offices. And he would send me out on these calls. I mean, I didn't go to school for this, but basically just being kind of tossed out into the world and hey, go fix this.
Yeah, it's usually the best way to learn, really, is, it's like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm going to figure everything out, and then it'll all kind of come into place, I think.
Yeah, and in those offices at the time, it wasn't mission critical, you know what I mean? The networks inside of an office were it was 10 base T. I mean, it was nothing. Right. People had email, but it was still kind of like a novelty, it wasn't really, companies used it internally, but people weren't sending each other business emails. Right. At least in my experience. I mean, I wasn't super deep rooted into it at that point. I was more of a inquisitive person, wanting to learn and know exactly what was going over the wires. I didn't really care about software back then. I was more into fiber optics and Cat5 at that point.
So then you got somehow you got connected to the Westin building, and can you just first of all say what the Westin building is and just describe it quickly?
Yeah, sure. The Westin building is the interconnection point up here in the Northwest. It's where all the carriers bring in terrestrial fiber into a meet me room. And then there's a couple, there's one Pacific cable that comes into the building. And then there's a couple skinny routes, which are regional undersea fiber cable. Not really undersea, but it runs in Puget Sound. And there's a few data centers in there. And the current company I work for, we have 4 suites in there. Equinix is in there for the region, and every single carrier you can think of has a point of presence in there. There's over 300 carriers in the meet me room currently.
Right. And it's kind of a somewhat tall, very square.
It's 34 stories. I would say it's probably 80% carrier and co-location inside the building, and then 20% office. I may be wrong, but there's a lot of co-location companies. Well, there used to be a lot of co-location companies in there, but now there's only like a handful. So, and then just the carrier pops, but those don't count.
Right. So how did you get involved in working there?
Well, so early on in the 90s, for my regular job, I was splicing fiber and doing at the time, big data center builds like for Amazon, Microsoft, and a couple of smaller companies in the Seattle area. Well, big, I guess. I did a lot of work for Boeing, did the baseball stadium, did the football stadium, and everything was of course, all the carrier pops. Everything was in the Weston building, and then started getting contracts to do fiber splicing inside the meet me room. And I think I spliced probably 30 or 40% of the panels in there, like in the beginning. I was always on projects in there, and riding the elevator up and down, you meet people like the engineer at WorldCom, or the engineer at the time it was Quest.
Right.
And these are all like, long haul engineer pop guys, and they're always like, and I'm pretty social. So, I'm like, hey, how's it going? Hey, are you hiring? And because I was tired of working outdoors doing OSP, because it's nasty. I was on emergency splice crew, and doing fiber restorations, and I didn't like it. I didn't like going up in the bucket trucks.
Right.
I'm scared of heights, so that was always a fun thing, hanging off a bucket, trying to pull a splice case off of a pole. And it wasn't me. I needed to get indoors. So I got a job with MCI WorldCom, and working in the 14th floor in the Weston building. We had the whole floor plate. I think the floor plates are 10,000 square feet, or maybe 8,000 square feet. I forget how big the floor plates are. So I started working at MCI WorldCom and got thrown into troubleshooting DS3s and DS1s. They sent me to DMS, Nortel DMS school. I got certified on the DMS 250, the DMS 500, and then I got bored with that, and I was like, I really like fiber and transport, and I really want to learn about dense wave division multiplexing. And so they sent me to Sonnet school, which was, so I got these are certifications that we don't even talk about anymore, and I took them off my LinkedIn profile because, the younger generation doesn't know what it is. So OC12, OC48, OC192, and I was part of the first deployment of OC768, and then just learning as much as I could about layer 1 and all the intricacies of transmission and all the issues that are on fiber, whether it be polar modal dispersion issues, everything, just trying to soak it up. And I think I actually spent Y2K in the Weston building babysitting the DMS 500 just in case the switch broke, which was pretty funny. Even though it was Y2K certified, but I was the youngest, so I had to babysit the switch.
Right. And sit
This,
out New Year's Eve.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
I mean,
funny.
I totally snuck some vodka in there, but
Yeah, it's a good idea. What
yeah.
was the contingency plan if something went wrong?
Well, Nortel sent out like so we had all of our backup, tapes and everything.
Hmm.
Um, there were all these procedures to bring the switch back up online, and then load all the backup tapes, which yeah, whatever. I mean,
Right, right,
it would have took days,
right.
um, but yeah, we had a plan in place. I had all the DAT, so we used DAT tapes, and I had all the DAT tapes for like the last like month. We had them all lined up and ready to go. But yeah, it's pretty funny. Nothing
Yeah,
happened, of course.
right, right. It's
But
I mean, it's one of those things that if something like that were to happen in Y2K, it would have been bad. If something were to happen like that now, that somehow there was some vulnerability, it would be catastrophic. A lot has changed since then, but even then, banking would have been screwed up. It's kind of amazing that they were able to make it work so well. That it really was seamless.
yeah, and it was we relied more on hardware and embedded systems,
Yeah,
um, in the software wise, like most of the gear was all just kind of command line. And I mean, you didn't have a Windows box running, your infrastructure, or not that you use a Windows box now, but you know what I mean.
yeah,
It wasn't heavy software related, which I know eventually once everything kind of gets virtualized and just everything is software controlled, when something catastrophic happens, it's going to be really bad, I think.
yeah, yeah. Well,
But
I mean, it's funny back when everything was embedded, everything kind of worked,
yeah,
that they didn't really even talk about firmware as much. It's just when
yeah,
something was there, it was going to work. And nowadays, since everything is in software and everything needs constant updates, if something hasn't gotten the latest security or firmware patch, it's a huge vulnerability. But there were security issues back then. I shouldn't say that it was the good old days because it was still a problem. But yeah, it's interesting how I keep talking to people about how we kind of go backwards as we go forwards.
yeah. I mean, since we don't, I mean, we run a pretty good size infrastructure where I'm at now, but I just wonder, like, some of the larger companies that don't like to talk about their failures. I just wonder, like, how many engineers, when they're doing firmware upgrades on hardware, how many of those engineers actually brick the box,
Yeah,
because I know, like, carriers, when they have to do firmware upgrades on their switches, um, you send out your maintenance notification, and you're doing, I've got both of my fingers crossed right now, by the way. They're crossing their fingers like, please don't brick, please don't brick, please don't brick. I mean,
yeah,
but because I remember when I worked at Time Warner Telecom, when I got more into like backbone engineering and stuff, and managing the metro rings. I remember the first week I got in there, they were using Cisco 15454s they were using them as metro transport gear. And I was like, ooh, they're not necessarily like carrier grade, but my first week there, the director looked at me and said, "Oh, you look smart. Why don't you do a software upgrade on all the rings?" And I'm looking at him like, I've never done a software upgrade on that box. And what's the procedure? Oh, don't worry, the knock will walk you through it. I'm like, yeah, the knock will walk me through it, but what happens if it bricks? And he's like, what is
right.
that? And I'm like, well, okay, but I mean, that's the cool thing about kind of growing up in the carrier world and then switching to the data center world, is that the carrier world and all the old school engineers that I got to learn stuff from, they instilled like a lot of like checks and balances and change control, and really talk about, you know, the MOP, the method of procedure, and make sure that all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed before you like push the button. It seems like to me when I got into the whole co-location and data center industry, you know, there was only like a handful of us that came from telco, and then there was all these new guys, and everything was a little bit more kind of software based, and they didn't really necessarily have all this like hardware knowledge. I mean, it really, you know, not to go off on a tangent, but it really freaked me out that most of the network engineers that I met at the time didn't know what a fiber was, or like they had no idea, you know, all the issues that could happen just on the fiber level, you know.
Right.
I mean, it was crazy, and I'm like, and I kept on going, why is, oh, because those guys are the newbies and they only know router world. They don't know pulling the wave off of the DWDM gear and plugging the wave into the route, you know, into the router. You know, they don't know any of that stuff because it was mainly in the carrier world. But yeah, anyways, could go on about that stuff. I'll start sounding old.
Well, no, I mean, do you think a lot more of that has changed because of fiber adoption in the data center?
I think, yeah, well, yes and no. The one thing that I noticed in the last like 10, 15 years is the like for me, like I was considered like a super tech or a super tech super manager there for a while, where I could, you know, deploy a network, manage the data center, rack servers, turn servers up, you know, just do simple remote hands on them, you know, go turn on the generator, do a transfer, put the UPS on bypass, you know, I mean, like, kind of like, you know, when I think of a data center manager, I think of a data center manager like you're in charge of the whole freaking thing.
Yeah.
Now they're like, you have like a facilities manager and then you have a data center manager. And the data center manager doesn't necessarily even like to touch the hardware anymore. And the facility guys, they're scared as shit to touch the servers, because they're like, oh no, we're in charge of the, you know, the HVAC and the crack chillers and the generators and stuff. It's really weird. It's like, it's kind of like all getting kind of segmented, you know. But, and sometimes people look at me funny, like I'm not really technically in operations anymore, but I mean, I still have one foot in the grave basically. And when I start talking about fiber and networks and undersea fiber and terrestrial fiber and pulling the fiber into the building and terminating it, and, you know, and then switch gears and go, oh, really? The UPS just went into bypass? What's up with that? What's going on with the, you know, did you know, are there back, you know, did the caps break or something? You know, it's just like, just all this, you know, I start going super technical on the infrastructure side, you know, and people look at me like, how do you know all that? I'm just like, seriously?
Yeah.
Like, aren't you the data center? I mean, I try not to be a smart ass, you know, but I look at him and I go, aren't you the data center manager? Like, I look at him like, don't you know what's going on? You know?
Yeah. And well, that's one of my, you know, that does seem like it's a real problem. I don't know when it started, but that the facilities guys and the IT personnel or network people, they don't talk to each other. And so even when there's new equipment that's installed, a lot of times the data center manager doesn't know it.
Right.
You know?
Right. Which blows me away. You know, I'm just like, how do you not know that, you know, 40-ton chiller just got installed out in the yard out there? You know, it's like,
right. Or the reverse of that too. Like, oh, we just installed 200 kW worth of servers in the data center. It's like, oh wait, oh really? That means that I'm going to have to install more cooling, and nobody told me. It's there's a kind of a back and forth sometimes. I don't know about colo, but it definitely happens in enterprise these days.
Well, yeah, and that just segues into, I'm not going to name any names, but these large companies that have outsourced their data center operations, and like they've outsourced it so much that that skill set is no longer in their company internally. So
Right.
they're always no offense to the consultants, but they're always relying on these consultants, but not all consultants really kind of know what they're talking about, because one, they've never actually ran a data center before, so they don't, it's like, unless you've been in operations and you kind of understand how those things work, it's like, if they were all perfect and they're all running perfectly in our world, then that would be the case. But they don't run perfectly. They break all the time. I mean, they stupid stuff breaks in a data, like the dumbest things break in a data center.
Yeah.
Where you're like, why did that break?
Like EPO panels break. That's the end of the world, really.
Yeah, I've removed EPOs out of data centers because
Yeah.
they're just, I'm like, I don't know.
No,
They're
I mean the
ridiculous.
EPO is definitely a single point of failure by design. And
Yeah.
if somebody miswires a relay, then suddenly you shut everything down. So, it's it's a real problem.
Well, yeah, you mean like the shunt trips hanging off the fire panel to the crack units, and all of a sudden your fire panel, something goes haywire inside the software and sends a signal, and then all of a sudden you're like standing in this room where you're on the edge, by the way. Like if the cracks turn off, it's gonna shoot up to 100 degrees, no problem. And all of a
Yeah.
sudden they go boom, and you're like, what the? And and the first thing I would do is I'd look up. I'm like, okay, the lights are still on, so that's not it, And I'm like, yeah, I've had numerous people hit EPO buttons for stupid reasons, and
Hmm.
I'm just like, some
And it's
some cities require it, but yeah, I would just play dumb and be like, oh nope, there's no EPOs in here. When we
yeah,
moved, there was none installed, so we're grandfathered in.
right. Yeah, I mean it's not even necessarily required by code anymore. Depends on local jurisdiction, but and you don't even necessarily have to have an EPO button at the doors anymore.
Hmm.
So yeah, we don't.
I mean,
We've
that
done a
used to
number of data centers without that.
Yeah, I mean, there used to be the EPO button, and then there used to be I mean, I worked in Halon data centers, so we had a Halon button right next to the EPO.
Right.
So, and the procedure was like, oh yeah, if you see fire or smoke, hit the EPO first and then dump the Halon, but make sure you're outside of the thing because it's going to suck the oxygen out. You're like, oh
Right.
yeah,
Right.
but that was a long time ago. They don't let you have Halon anymore. So,
Yeah.
but
They
yeah,
it's still grandfathered though.
yeah,
Yeah, I still
yeah,
see it every once in a while.
yeah.
Today's episode is brought to you by Green Lane Design. Green Lane has been designing, engineering, and building critical facilities for over 10 years, including major enterprise customers as well as co-location facilities. GLD has designed and developed an integrated stack of design disciplines. If you would be interested in a free assessment, go to greenlanedesign.com, click on contact, and mention the podcast. So we already touched on a bunch of different things. We kind of skipped over the transition from networks to data centers. So
Oh, sure. Well,
how did that happen?
that's pretty easy. So once again, I was riding the elevators up and down in the Weston building, and there was this guy in the elevator, and he's like, "Hey, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm the senior guy at MCI WorldCom up here on the 14th floor." And they were like, I think they were on the 12th floor, and they were doing a build out. And the guy looked at me and he goes, "So you're real familiar with COs and stuff?" I go, "Oh yeah, yeah." And at that particular time, so we owned UNet, and we had the big backbone routers in there, and I think they were Force 10s, these big like jet engines that we had in there.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, what kind of experience do you have?" I go, "Man, I know about routers and servers, and been in at the time. I say, how long had I been in the building? I don't know. I've been in the building like 6 or 7 years." And he's like, "Yeah, want a job?" And I'm like, "Doing what?" And he took me to the floor, and it just looks so nice and clean, like it was just clean. It didn't have, 734 coax running everywhere and twisted pair, hanging out of the ceiling and stuff. And there weren't any, I mean, there was a DC battery plant, but it was, brand new, wasn't archaic looking. It didn't look like you could get shocked anywhere inside there,
Right.
And I was like, "This is pretty." And, he looked at me, and he goes, "Well, how much you make now?" And I'm like, "I don't make a lot." And he's like, "Well, how much do you want to make?" And I'm like, "I want to make this much." And he went, "Okay." And I went, "What?" I was like, "Okay, well, I'll work for you." And that was above net. So, or Metro Media above net. So I became the senior data center guy for Metro Media above net, running the 12th floor in the Weston building. And it's kind of like the best of both worlds for me. One, I get to get into the whole data center co-location business, and two, it was a massive dark fiber company, which was, I could do that in my sleep. So I was running our splice crews and building out the backbone down the West Coast, and we were deploying the Juniper M160s, which were the biggest big iron that they had, with the OC192 blades on them. I remember we did Juniper in the core and Cisco on the edge when I was at AboveNet. But so I was part of backbone engineering. I wasn't necessarily like a network engineer, but I was a layer 1 guy, and just basically took care of the metro and the long haul, but didn't really get into the rest of the stack. I never really was like kind of like what I call like a hardcore network engineer, because my friends were that. So whatever I needed done, I could call my friends, and they would just, I'd give them access to the core, and they would go in and do stuff, but
right,
which was totally not right, totally illegal, but
well,
whatever.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
did you have anything to do with any of the underwater or undersea stuff in the Weston building, or that was just kind of
No, that was
there?
Yeah, that was existing. That was that cable is the PC1 cable that goes on the north Harbor Point, which is north of Seattle, up north of a town called Linwood. It's in a place called Mukilteo. No, that was existing. It's a pretty old cable system. No, but just going to Pacific Telecom conference every year. I think I'm coming up on my 19th year or something, going to PTC coming up this January. But I was just always a fan. Now I did go out on a splice ship, and I did go and participate in a repair of a cable out in the water, but that was like a hookup. I've never. Yeah, I mean, I had some connections through AT&T, and I got to go out on the ship and do some stuff. But I actually started a company with some friends. It was called One Ocean, and it was kind of ambitious. We were trying to figure out how much it was going to cost to map the ocean in high res, the full ocean. And the company that funded us in the beginning was a company called Global Seas. It was a good friend of mine. He owns this big fishing company, and he had an ocean class mapping vessel. And the funny thing was, is like I would go to PTC, and I would actually know which companies were dropping cables in the water because my buddy had the largest private ocean class mapping vessel on the West Coast. He did all that work. So he would have all that data. And originally that data, it was all like vector data of the bottom of the ocean and stuff. We were going to take that data and put it in and build a database that would be easily accessible for companies like cable companies to look at the topography of the bottom of the ocean and see where they're going to lay a cable. I mean, that was what we wanted to do, but making money at it, that's.
Yeah. I saw your white paper on that. I think it was like Project Infinity or something.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about our oceans. I learned a lot that scared me, and if anything, it just made me more of a hippie. And
well, I saw in the thing that there was actually a lot of information about like fisheries and things like that. It wasn't just underwater mapping of fiber. It was like, there was a bunch of stuff in there about rockfish and things like that. Is that part of what made the difference for you?
Yeah, I mean, just really learning about how important the ocean is for all of us. I mean, it's the lungs of the planet, and laying all these cables across the Pacific or the Atlantic. I mean, it's not as destructive as somebody who does a dragnet across the ocean or undersea mining. But yeah, I mean, I learned a lot about the ocean.
Yeah.
And I really wished that we really pursued that mission. Of course, it went a different direction because somebody decided to hire the freaking CTO of the cloud division from IBM, and that guy came in and he like messed everything up. But for some reason the investors wanted to make money, and I was like, whatever. I want to build ships and go map the ocean. So
that's always what screws it up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Having to actually return revenue.
Yeah.
So. Well, it's an interesting project though, because I mean the two parts of it are so important and they're so not related. The ecology of it. I mean, in terms of the money making, like if you were to go into ecology, you'd probably get funding from a government or university or something like that. Whereas if you're mapping the seafloor for undersea cables, you're probably doing it for, telecoms or, a military application or something. So it's like, who are you working for?
Trust me, man. We talked to the Navy. We almost had the Navy convinced to give up some maps, not strategic maps, but other data that they had that wasn't classified.
Yeah.
And talking to NOAA, NOAA is just, they do a lot of good things for us, but they were just kind of ridiculous. I mean, they were stuck in the 1950s and with their thinking, not technology wise, but their thinking and the way that they do things. And yeah, I mean, I learned a lot of stuff, man. I mean, just how things work governmental wise and public private sector. And it's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of secret things that we found out about the oceans and what certain companies are doing out there. And, they don't necessarily want you to know what they're doing out there. I mean,
yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot of things in the ocean that people should really research. I mean, that information's out there. I mean, we took like 3 years doing it, but there's a lot of stuff that needs to be talked about that people just aren't aware of.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I find it really interesting, but I guess we should get back to data. I'm like, I keep wanting to be like, oh, but what about strategic assets and the Russians were snooping our fiber, and
Yeah.
we could talk about that for a long time, but I'm like,
Oh yeah,
I
we
guess
can. Yeah, we can talk into that.
yeah,
I mean,
because those are such important strategic assets, just
yeah,
security wise, everything. If a country were to attack those cables, it's
yeah.
kind of like an act
Oh,
of
we're not.
war, and
So we're not going to talk about those special submarines that can intercept the cables. Okay, that's cool.
yeah. I don't know, can you? um,
I'm a civilian, sure.
yeah.
No,
So,
I don't want. I don't want to get down. I don't want to go down too far down that rabbit hole
yeah,
because there's a bunch of brainwashed people in the country right now. That when you start talking about that, they're like, "Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist." Yeah, okay. Time to stop talking. So,
yeah. It's
but
funny when somebody says conspiracy theory. There are a lot of conspiracies in the world. All that conspiracy means is that a bunch of people are talking with themselves and not with anybody else. So a lot of conspiracy theories are crazy, and there are conspiracies out there.
yeah, I deal in conspiracy fact, not
Right.
theory, just fact.
So, but how did you get to where you are now, doing strategy and kind of current work? First of all, what is your current position?
My current title is director of carrier relations, kind of a little bit of network strategy. Network strategy meaning, hey, where should we build, or how should we connect, these two networks together, strategy, and then relationship or relation wise, just kind of tapping my buddies that work in the carrier world and stuff, and um, privy to where they're going to be building next, and how you can leverage wherever their new builds are at to augment your network, and in the long run make you more money, and touch more clients and more people that you weren't able to touch before.
So did some of that knowledge of, how the networks came to be what they are today, does that help you kind of pay that forward to figure out how to move on to building them in the future?
Yeah. I hang out with hang out friends. I'm friends with some people that plan big strategies across the planet, and we meet and talk on a regular basis. And we don't necessarily talk about like cable security and stuff, but I mean it is a topic when we're talking about undersea fiber and terrestrial cable and just how unsecure it is.
Yeah.
Um, we talk about sea level rise, natural disasters, hurricanes, tidal surge, and then on the terrestrial end, we talk about fires and earthquakes and stuff like that. Just it's basically like a big mitigation discussion,
Right.
or
Do you
what if.
Is there a lot of interest in the sort of SpaceX low Earth orbit satellite stuff that is in the works but not deployed yet?
Well, funny you should say that. Yeah, I mean, I've known about some technology for a really long time right now, and it actually just became, or the public can talk about it now. They just released it a couple of years ago, but it had been around for years. But yes and no. I mean, I don't know. I mean, using antennas to shoot up into space I don't know about you, but I'm freaking terrified of waveguides that go to those dishes. Um, of course, now there's digital, um, but it takes a lot of power to receive that stuff and transmit that stuff to the birds. I haven't been in that industry for so long that like I don't really pay attention to it too much.
Yeah.
Um, but um, I know that the military for years has had higher bandwidth on their birds. I don't know how big the transponders are on the Leos and the Meos that say like SpaceX is launching or somebody else. I mean, I haven't really looked into it. I don't know. I mean, I don't hang out with the broadcast people anymore. I used to
Right.
hang out with a lot of broadcast people that were basically SATCOM guys and stuff. Um, and because originally the transponders were 45 megabits, so that you could just deliver everything via a DS3, and you could just put it back. You could put it up onto the bird, and the codecs, um, everything was, basically the software was all the same all the way through the system, so you
Yeah.
didn't have to like convert. Um, so I don't know. Um, I mean, if there's a Leo hanging out up there, I mean that bird would have to be like really shielded. There's all this stuff that like you and me, I'm like, I'm not an astrophysicist. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, um,
Well,
you remember in the COs, like not too long ago, we weren't allowed to take our cell phones in there because it would interfere with the gear.
yeah.
So, and I'm sure they compensate for that up there in space, but, there's all kinds of crap up there that could, you know, there's natural disasters up in space.
Yeah, it's true.
Um,
Yeah. The solar flare could, especially they're talking about it's a crazy idea. They're talking about putting like 4,000 small satellites in low Earth orbit. It's supposed to be very high bandwidth, but I'm very skeptical of it because of the cost and the scope of the project. But it's supposed to be ultra low latency. It's supposed to be the be all and end all of all this stuff. And it's like, well, maybe, but it's
well,
very complicated.
if I remember correctly, I don't know if it was a MEO. The last time I paid attention to milliseconds up to the bird, I was doing a satellite project for a billionaire that just recently passed away up here. We were getting 800 milliseconds up to the bird, and then and then so we'd go up to the bird, we'd bounce and then bounce it down to one of the yachts. But it was 800 milliseconds up and 800 milliseconds down.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was a Leo. I think it was a MEO.
Mm-hmm.
But latency's latency, and like the math behind that, and the distance, and the carrier wave. If I'm saying that correctly, I don't know if it's a carrier wave. I forget what the terms are, but sure. Unless they're using like free space optics or something like a laser. I don't know. I haven't really looked into it.
Okay.
It sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it is.
How about you and me go down to SpaceX and be like, hey man, we want to see this technology. But
I wouldn't mind. That'd be very cool. I keep trying to keep up with the next big thing, but at the same time, you can't. There's so many next big things that it's really hard to say. So, is there? Let me ask you that. What do you see a next big thing that is growing in either data centers or networks?
I think incorporating. I just got a new phone last Wednesday that I've been waiting for 15 months to hit into my hot little hands. I bought the red hydrogen phone.
Oh, yeah.
And it's got a format on here called 4V, which is holographic. They're holopics. I've been shooting pictures for the last week. I've been having a blast and doing 4V holographic video and stuff on the phone. I would have to say that finally virtual reality, there's two other terms, augmented reality, and then there's another one.
Like
I'm
mixed
think
reality, or
mixed reality. I think I think that is going to be coming more into play for us having more tactile, visual type control of stuff. And it'll be in the data center, meaning instead of having a bunch of knock screens up on a wall, you just put your goggles on and you have your power gloves and your software controlling stuff that in the data center, or even maybe even troubleshooting a server, going in or doing like a reboot, or like literally taking like an augmented reality, like moving your head to the power button where the little dot's at. Have you ever played with augmented reality and reboot
yeah.
server? I mean, like cool stuff like that. Technology wise, what would I like to see? I would like to see thermal electric being a little bit more adopted in our industry. Most likely Apple and Google and people like that are playing with it. I'm not a big fan of fuel cell generators. I'm a fan of the hydrogen aspect of it, but I'm not a fan of how you get the hydrogen, because there's a lot of stuff that they don't talk about. When you're extracting hydrogen out of gas or natural gas and stuff, that's the byproduct that they have an issue with, like trying to get rid of the byproduct.
Right.
But whatever, it's a big freaking toy, and those companies, that spend billions on renewable energy, but they really have to ask themselves, what is renewable energy? Solar is, wind is, nuclear is not freaking renewable. Dams are not renewable energy. We have all these ex-submarine nuclear scientist dudes that work in the data center. Well, maybe we should give them 40 megawatt reactors to play with inside the data centers. I don't know. I would love to see a 40 megawatt reactor inside of a data center. I think it'd be really cool.
I was talking to somebody about that. He was talking about, having steam turbines and stuff on data center campuses. And he was a nuclear engineer when he first started. So
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, the thing about nuclear is, you're right, it's not sustainable, but there actually is a lot of fissile nuclear fuel on the Earth.
Sure.
It'll run out eventually. So
Right.
that's a tough one.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, there's some other exotic technologies out there. Shit, I even saw this thing called they came and demoed it for me. This was like 7 years ago. Compressed air UPS that was like a flywheel.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was like, now that's cool.
Yeah.
And like the runtime was how many bottles of air you can put in the system, and I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm a flywheel fan. When I was at AboveNet, we ran high tech flywheels in our data centers. I mean, they were a pain in the ass, but they were cool. I mean, it was the coolest thing. You walk into this data center and here's this like flywheel hooked up to the generator, with a clutch, and I'm like, oh, this is cool.
Yeah,
I used to love doing quarterly tests with those things. I mean, it was just rad. It was like, man, this is like high tech, but not really. It's been around since I don't know, man. I want the technology to change, but
yeah, it sometimes feels like everything has been real incremental in the past few years. And I know that there's a lot of opportunity to make cool things happen, but going back to flywheels, like flywheel is in some ways low energy, and there's no battery, so there's no disposal, but it's it's something that's spinning 20,000 RPMs or something like that, and it's a giant rock, so it is actually also dangerous. It's just a weird. They are cool though. I just almost hearing the high pitched whir of it. It's like, oh, this is a real device.
It was super loud when you go into our generator room where the flywheels are at. I just remember every 6 months we had to shut them down and replace the brushes on them. But I think the newer flywheels, you don't have to do any of that. But I mean, these things were like, I mean, these flywheels were the ones that NATO used. I mean, they're just like big, gnarly pieces of hardware. I mean, it's
Yeah.
so, but yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things that I worry about the most is security. That I think there really needs to be some innovation in security that, we're not, there have been so many hacks that have happened, but the problem is that it's not usually a security issue. It's somebody doing something stupid or a human error issue. So it's like,
Yeah.
you can't, you're not going to, you have to have something that beats human error in networks, and, not just giving some HVAC contractor VPN keys. I mean, it's a lot of time it's simple stuff. When we had talked before, you had talked about you're interested in kind of the security and almost like the black hat of how do you actually see behind the curtain, and what is actually going on within things that you're not supposed to see.
Most of the good security people that I know started off being like black hat hackers,
Yeah.
and because they think like the opponent, like, oh, what would he do. And what's funny is like most of the really good security people that I know are all ex network engineers, because they're playing, because most of the security stuff that happens now is coming across the network. So you really gotta be like a network engineer to really go and infiltrate the system and be a systems guy and stuff. But I mean, there's all kinds, physical security. But on the other hand, nothing is secure. I mean, you're dreaming if you think that things are secure. But it's all about mitigation and what your procedures are, and what you're trying to protect. Who has freaking access to it? I
Yeah.
mean, there's so many organizations that are so sloppy. I mean, people don't even do background checks on people anymore. You know, I mean, I remember, I mean, seriously, nobody does background checks on anybody. Like, they just
That's
call their
crazy.
previous employer. Is he a nice guy? Yeah, he's totally cool. Okay, great. He's hired. You know, I
Right.
mean, some people say, well, it doesn't matter if you're doing a background check on somebody, and I'm like, sure. I mean, everybody has their lives out there on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, social engineering is easier than
Yeah,
it has ever been in history.
yeah,
People use their dog's name as their password, and then they have their dog's name in 50 different places in Facebook, and it takes 3 seconds to figure that out. It's
yeah.
incredible. Yeah.
I mean, people are. I don't want to say people are sheep, but people are sheep. Frankly, I'm really surprised that something massive hasn't happened on a global scale. But I know. I mean, I know that stuff does. That's like saying there isn't. We're the only intelligent planet in the solar system. It's like, yeah. I mean, I didn't go this last summer, but I usually go to DEF CON,
Hmm.
but I go for different reasons. I don't go to Black Hat or anything like that, because I'm not an info set. I don't care about info security. I don't. I mean, I don't have a Facebook page. I mean, I have a LinkedIn profile, but I don't have an Instagram account or any of that stuff. If you're gonna reach me, you can, either through LinkedIn or my SoundCloud account. So,
Yeah.
or if you have my phone number. But yeah,
Yeah.
social engineering is a big thing, man. I mean, unless you're kind of a hardcore security guy, your radar isn't really on. I mean,
Yeah.
most IT guys in charge of security at companies. I mean, you could easily social engineer those guys easily, because they're really, because they're not. What am I trying to say? They're not paying attention. But
Right.
it's not their fault, because the company that they work for, doesn't have training or policies in place to train them to make sure that they're not getting socially hacked.
Right. Well, not only that, but I have seen really shitty passwords on pretty important, the routers and things like that. And I, I almost want to slap somebody. It's like, you think this, just because it has a exclamation point in it doesn't mean that it's going to stop anybody. The the password security. I mean, there are ways to do it right, and it's
Yeah.
not that hard, you know.
Yeah, you should, if you're like, you should have at least 16 characters,
Yeah,
and meaning, you know, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, symbols, whole nine yards, like
right.
in this, a 16 character. I mean, to crack 16 characters, I mean, that's, doing a brute force hack. I mean, have fun with that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
at one point I was trying to explain bits of entropy to somebody, and I was like, "Oh, this isn't gonna work." I was like, I just made a mistake. Actually, just make a long password. Try not to use dictionary words as best you can.
yeah,
It's amazing that something so important goes by the wayside constantly. It's not just a
yeah.
little bit; it's constant with really important stuff.
What really
Like,
scares me is how fast stuff's getting now. I mean, I don't do this stuff anymore. I probably wouldn't know how to. I wouldn't know where to start to write like a brute force crack software. But with everything speeding up and getting access to like big GPU rigs and machine learning and all this other stuff, it's like, oh great. It's like
yeah,
now you can build this like supercomputer for pretty cheap, for as much as buying like a kick-ass gaming system. You can build this deep thinking thing
yeah.
that's in your house, and you can just train it just to crack passwords,
Or you,
and
you can you can buy a botnet for like $200.
exactly.
It's crazy.
Exactly. Yeah, I didn't want to get into that.
Yeah. No,
We
it's
don't want we don't want to train the little kids that are listening to this.
no,
What's
it's
the
true. Yeah. Uh, but
but
it is something that happens that a DDoS attack is easier than ever to launch. And not only could you do a DDoS attack, but you could also do like a distributed any kind of attack, like a
right.
SQL injection attack or something. And
Yeah.
yeah, you can really do a lot with very little. So
Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
in that the DDoS command is not that big. Like if I were to take my fingers and put them on the screen right now, it's like an inch. It's like an inch long.
right, right.
It's like, and it's very simple. You look at it and go, God, really? That's it? Well, yeah,
Yeah,
but you got to know how to use that command.
right.
But but like in the back of 2600, there's guys that sell boxes already set up
Yeah,
to do DDoS, and these things are so sophisticated. They got like a built-in pineapple in them, and so like you could literally like take it and go to a coffee shop and set it up in a coffee shop that's got a free Wi-Fi in there, and you can launch it. It's just like, oh, why are you guys selling that shit? It's
yeah,
like, I'm like,
yeah.
it's better if they pay their $300 and go to DEF CON and learn how to build that stuff, solder it. I'm like, don't
Right.
freaking build it and then sell it to, and I'm like, but it is what it is.
You're kind of out of the specific data center management game, right? Or are you still somewhat involved?
I'm still somewhat involved. I mean, I'm kind of in my new company, in my new job. I'm not. I'm more of a answering questions when they ask me questions, and what do you
Yeah.
think about this type thing. And our data center manager, he's a really smart guy. He'll come to me with questions and stuff. I mean, I try to work with him. Infrastructure. He's not a big infrastructure guy, like meaning like fiber and copper wise. So he kind of taps me for that stuff. But he's pretty good operational wise, generators and cracks and crays and all that
But
fun stuff.
you used to be in the PoE game, right? Trying to improve efficiency in the data center. Is that something you still think about, or is that not as much on your radar?
Yeah, I still think about it. I mean, everybody's got an opinion. You know, Even though, I'm in the co-location business right now, I mean, I still think we should be building, lights out facilities that are like fully automated. But even that, even me saying that scares the shit out of me. Like, what did you just say? Fully automated robots?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? But the less human interaction in the data center, the better. Yeah, efficiencies, PUE. I just need to get rid of PUE. It's just, whatever.
Kind of agree with that. I mean, it has its place. It's
Yeah,
helpful,
sure.
at least if you make one change and your PUE gets better without changing any other variables,
Yeah,
that's good to know.
yeah.
But I was just talking to somebody about how it's not fair to judge, one data center against another, or one time that a data center is running against another time that a data center is running, because as soon as you change the IT load within the data center, your PUE is going to change without changing anything else. So it's not a fair comparison. If you just keep adding servers, your PUEs might well get better because things like transformers and crack units and stuff have overhead and chill water loops. So those are just going to work more efficiently as you keep adding. So it's just trying to
Well,
explain that to people isn't quite
yeah.
fair.
So the company I work at now, we've got, I would call them five traditional data centers where you have chilled water and stuff. But the big facility that I came from, South Hill, which was also called Centeris, was 100% outside air with evaporative cooling. So for the longest time there, I was like the poster child at the data center conferences for 100% outside air. I had this big upside down aircraft carrier, basically. So we pulled cold air in, blew it down with big air handlers, and we had everything. The hot row was contained, and we pulled the hot air down and out. So in that data center, the hotter the better, because we would reuse the server heat to keep the proper temperature to the floor. We're doing
Mm-hmm.
ASHRAE 72, 78 degree air to the floor. So when there was no load in that data center, it was a pain in the ass. We actually had to turn on heaters, which just
Yeah.
totally screwed up the PUE. Yeah, the 100% outside air, it was fun. I ran that facility for 8 years or whatever, 7 years. I told myself if I ever were to build a data center, I would never use chilled water or anything. If I was going to do anything like that, it'd probably be either total immersion, not necessarily water chilled backplane cabinets, because those things kind of freak me out a little bit. But using like a dielectric liquid to pull the
Oh
heat
yeah.
out.
So
Uh,
so like a mineral oil, or
yeah,
like I saw 3M had, like, they were using their Novec material, which is a fire suppressant, but that can be
yeah,
used as a dielectric
yeah,
heat exchange. So you're saying, when you said immersion, you're actually saying take the computer, the chips and hardware, and putting it into a liquid in a vat, basically,
yeah,
and then using that, circulating that, or allowing that to evaporate off the chips, and then
yeah.
having a
Of
heat
course.
exchanger or something that
Yeah, yeah,
gets rid of that heat. Yeah.
yeah. Totally, totally. I mean, unfortunately, in our environments, there's all this different hardware and different hardware configurations, and so it'd have to be something that was just like crazy built. Like the server would just have to be just like the server that does everything. you know?
Right.
which is
Yeah.
really not, which is really not the case most of the time.
Right.
So
It would all have to be specialty hardware, and you probably wouldn't want to put spinning discs in the liquid,
no,
I'm
no,
guessing.
it'd be all it'd probably be that new stuff. Was it MME or that new
Yeah.
storage medium? I mean, there's other stuff I've been toying around in my head about figuring out how to actually pull that heat away, but not using like a medium, like a 3M medium, or anything traditional, blowing cold air across it or something. But really, this is the fringe science, figuring out really how to pull the heat off of the stuff, or
That's the fun stuff. Yeah.
yeah, the crazy stuff.
The last thing, it's funny because one of the reasons I actually wanted to talk to you is that somehow a theme for this podcast has already been algorithmic music, and I already interviewed somebody, a friend of mine, who is a synthesizer manufacturer.
Yeah,
He designs synths, and I
yeah,
know that you kind of have a house DJ background.
yeah.
So
I'm sitting in my studio right now, actually.
yeah. Well, that's how, I mean, I feel like the sound quality is better than usual because of that, I guess. But so that's something you're kind of still doing?
Yeah, I still do it.
If you wanted to, if you had any tracks that I can embed in this episode, I would put them,
Um,
I don't know if there's something I could do.
yeah, I don't think you could do it because I haven't
Yeah.
even done the work to ask permission about remixing
Yeah.
the track. But yeah, I mean, I'm actually sitting in my studio right now, and I'm staring at you on my dedicated Mac Mini, which is strictly designed for Ableton, or not designed, but it's dedicated just for Ableton Live,
Nice.
actually Ableton Suite, and yeah, I've been involved in electronic music since I was like 16. I started DJing when I was 16. Of course, vinyl, 12-inch records. Um, I played house music for probably 20 years. Um, I was a rave promoter in the 90s here in Seattle. I had a company called Cat and a Hat Productions. We hired, big name DJs, Moby, Doc Martin, Mark Farina, David Morales. I mean, the list goes on. Jesse Saunders, Manuel Pippin, DJ Trax, Frankie Knuckles. I mean, the list goes on. Do you remember that? You remember that movie where there were these guys that were sitting in a record store and they were like having arguments about music, and the younger generations coming in and they're like telling them like, you don't deserve to listen to that music.
Oh, like High Fidelity? Is that the
High
one?
Fidelity.
Yeah.
That scene in High Fidelity, I'm just like, one day I was like, oh my god, I'm turning into that dude. Just recently, like this summer, I started promoting and producing shows again.
Yeah.
I produced 3 shows in Seattle. One of them was they're called Lovely Day. We got together a bunch of DJs. I personally didn't play because the technology is now all jump drives, and I mean, I have a Serato set up, but I don't ever use it. I just don't have time.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And even now, like I'm looking at all this hardware in my studio. I mean, I have a Roland TR8, a Roland TV3, an SDA02 boutique synth, modular synth. I have the Zero Coast modular synth. I have the Ableton Push, and I have this guitar, which I got a nice Ibanez guitar that I actually have to get it restringed. And I don't really know how to play guitar, but this is like a hollow body electric guitar. It's pretty sweet. But I bought
Sure.
this. I bought these things that go over the frets to where it has LED lights, and it teaches you how to play songs and stuff. So you know, at some point, I wanted to incorporate that into processing, and and play with that stuff. But just like any with anything in technology, if you're like super super into it, you have all this really cool stuff. But the problem is that finding the time to sit down and actually create and make music it's like I mean, I'm struggling with it now, and Ableton Live is a beast. Like, if you don't work on that thing like every day or every week, when you go back to it, you're like, like, I have to reconfigure it, and like,
Right.
do all this. So it's like a learning process all over again. And for me, like with all this gear that I have, I bought all outboard gear because I had this fantasy that I was just going to go play live, and I have yet to go play live, but I got some pretty kick-ass gear.
Yeah.
And when I hook it all up and get everything all synced up, and I'm like creating tracks on the 808. I mean, it sounds awesome. And then I got all weirded out because I'm kind of an audiophile nerd. There wasn't enough bass for me in the studio, so I went and I bought a top of the line KRK active 10-inch sub that's totally tunable. So now there's plenty of bass. But it's part of that. It's part of that trying to keep the technical side of me alive, meaning working with my hands and touching hardware and not necessarily relying on the software. I've been slowly taking a class that deadmau has on Masterclass. Masterclass is this online teaching course, and like deadmau, everything that he does is all completely inside software. And me personally, I didn't want that. I still wanted the tactile analog type touch of the hardware. But that's just me. I mean, some people thrive in the software arena. I don't thrive in the software arena. I thrive in the tactile, touchy-feely type stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny too, because it means that you're actually doing somewhat of a performance on stage instead of just hitting an iPad.
Yeah, I mean, even now, like when we do the DJ shows and stuff, it's just crazy. Like you got the Pioneer 2000 Nexus decks, and instead of bringing your record bag in, they bring their jump drives, and they plug their jump drive jump drive into the system, and then it uploads to this screen. And the crazy part about whether it's Serato or the Pioneer decks, if you get lazy and if you're technically good, meaning when you're dropping the beat, you need to drop it on the one. And a lot of people don't know that. Like, they'll like try to blend tracks together, and they'll get all confused because like the vocals will stack on each other. But they'll press the auto button, and the Pioneer decks, like if you have your music completely, there's a program that they want you to use. It's called Rekordbox. You load all your music into Rekordbox, and it literally goes in and scans everything and tells you where all the breaks are at and everything. And if you press the auto button, it will literally drop the track in, and it'll literally mix everything for you. Now, a lot of DJs do that. A lot of those like poser DJs in Vegas, those big ones, will do shit like that. The indication that they're doing stuff like that is when they're just constantly with their fist, doing this the whole time.
Right.
You can't see me. And you'll hear the mix, and he's still pumping his fist. Oh, he's doing that with one hand? Wow, he's really good, So, but whatever. They're making millions of dollars. Good for them, EDM. I don't listen to that music. So,
Do you get it? Like the whole thing where they have those giant drops? Like, that's really the trend right now? I sometimes I like it, but sometimes it's just like, okay, when we have, okay, you're building. Okay, you're still building. All right, you're still building. And then, sometimes it kind of annoys me. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember you remember the big like techno anthems and stuff. I mean, those drops. Now those DJs, the other thing too, when they do those drops, is when you do that drop, you actually can hide mistakes when you're mixing. You remember the term slam mixing, where you just slam the tracks together? When you're doing those drops, you can do slam mixing really, and then you just go and then just slam it into the next song, but I think there's just tricks to hide stuff, but I don't know. I mean, I haven't like duplicated it yet, so I'm just talking out of my ass right now. But maybe we should do it sometime, like, oh, let's just do a set just with all drops. But
yeah, that's what it seems like sometimes.
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
especially when you're in Vegas. I mean, like, oh, I don't even go out to the, if I'm at a conference in Vegas, I won't even go out to those clubs anymore, because they literally annoy me. I'm just like, that's just annoying to me. Good for them. good for them for pushing electronic music to that level. But yeah, like it's almost like they took the soul out of the music.
Yeah.
It's
Well, it's funny
yeah,
too, because like where technology is at right now, you have the opportunity to even regardless of what kind of music it is, you have the opportunity to actually like control it in such a way that
yeah,
you're really controlling it rather than just having everything controlled by algorithms. Like
yeah,
I went to a hacker conference or a hacker event one time that met this guy Ray Lee to see him actually like with the hardware that was all just like Raspberry Pis and things hacked
yeah,
together.
yeah,
But he had gloves where he was basically conducting this kind of EDM song, and you kind of see behind the curtains, and a lot of it is algorithmic, but he was really controlling things with his hands, and
yeah,
he's part of a music collaboration called Ethereum, but
yeah,
it's just cool stuff. It's like okay, so you're doing that kind of work, but I actually see you doing something
yeah.
and can look behind the scenes. It's like, okay, so you got pedals, you could actually change it up on the fly if you wanted to. There's real performance there, which is I like.
Well, yeah, it's yeah. Many, 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 many years ago in the '90s, I was involved in this organization called the Cyber Artists in Seattle. And the cyber artists were traditional artists and electronic musicians and computer geeks got together, and we did like performances, and we installed like art around the city, electronic type art, and big like video walls and stuff like that around Seattle. And I was involved in a project where there was this guy named Bob Moses. He worked for this company called Rain, and he was a programmer. And we took a Nintendo Power Glove, and I told him, like, I've been trying to figure out how to use the Nintendo Power Glove to control my IntelliBeams at the raves, because I think it'd be really fun if I could sit up on stage and have this Power Glove and dance, but control the lights. And he's like, "Oh, I can write that for you." So here we are with this Nintendo Power Glove that has MIDI, basically a MIDI controller. And it was controlling the moving lights that we had at the party, and it turned out great. I think, I mean, there's all this technology. You're right. There's all this technology that's coming out where, like these guys wear these suits, and they're playing, they're doing, they're doing moves, and it's creating sounds and stuff. I think it's great. You won't catch me doing it because I'd probably throw my back out, but
Yeah.
but I think it'd be fun. It'd be cool. I just thought of this now. Here's something. So you're wearing a bodysuit, and you've got all these MIDI controllers on it, and you're doing yoga. And as you're doing yoga, you're creating ambient music. There we go. You heard it first on this podcast.
It's like the next goat yoga.
Yeah.
The next iteration of that. Trance yoga. Something. I don't know.
Yeah, like true ambient trance yoga. So yeah, exactly. So,
that would be awesome. Yeah, if you can patent that, I'll invest. I don't know. I feel like I've already taken a lot of your time, but it's been a good conversation. We took a good turn into music at the end, but I like talking about that stuff, so I appreciate you indulging me.
Well, it's funny. There's something you should check out. My little brother owns his own, it's called Experiential Marketing. It's like an advertising agency, and he's actually in Brooklyn right now. He's producing the show called the Goldie Awards, and I believe it's I think Adidas puts it on, but it's a DJ awards, and you should check it out. It's called the Goldie Awards, so GOLDIE awards.com, and you need to check this stuff out and you need to check it. So it's the second annual. The first time was last year. You got to see what these kids are doing. I mean, it's amazing. All the different categories. I mean, this could become like really big, and it's only the second year. But
yeah, well, I'm in Brooklyn fairly often, so Yeah,
Okay.
it's actually like a live event, or it's
Yeah, it's going on. Well, what time is it there now? It's like what, 6?
4:45. But
4:45? Yeah, it's
yeah.
going on right now in Brooklyn.
Oh, I don't think I could make it to Brooklyn right now, but uh,
But
yeah, I'll check it out. So, how can people find you? You said SoundCloud.
no, you can just find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Keep that SoundCloud thing kind of private. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, no, just LinkedIn. Garrick Sturgill. The company I work for is called IsoFusion. We're a classic co-location company. We also do hosting. We also run a network. We also do fiber to the home networks. Yeah, we're just the all around technology company. We'll do whatever you want us to do for money.
Nice.
So,
Is there anything specific that is like one of your big products right now?
well, like our big product that we're pushing, it's called Gigabit Now, but it's a fiber to the home product. We have a couple networks. We do the Issaquah Highlands here in Seattle, and then we do a place called Sea Ranch down north of San Francisco, and then pretty soon the city of Fullerton, California, is going to be coming online. We're going to be the ISP down there. And as far as like co-location, we're just a straight co-location company doing hosted private cloud solutions, utilizing VMware, kind of like what everybody else does. Well, we have over 700 colo customers. I mean, we're not small. We're pretty big. But yeah, just, rock star service, and we're all super technical. We're just super easy to do business with. We're still a smaller-ish company, so you don't get caught in the shuffle. Like your email doesn't get stuck in some inbox for days. You usually respond back to inquiries within a day.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I mean, that last mile really is what needs to get fixed right now.
So,
It's,
yeah,
they're just working with telcos and with the big network operators. It's torture sometimes. Like it
yeah,
really, it can be 90 days and you're still not hearing anything. You're supposed to get an install and they just won't do it.
yeah,
It's, yeah. I mean, and to the home too. There needs to be more competition in the marketplace for fiber to the home.
yeah, yeah,
Because everywhere really sucks.
yeah. Other than Comcast, yeah,
Yeah, other than Comcast, like we have really three providers at our house, and that's more than most people. We have like three big broadband providers. We got AT&T, we got Verizon, and we got Comcast. So there's some but we're in the Philly area, so that's where Comcast started. Like I got Comcast cable internet in like 1998. So they've been around for a long time, and it's only been fairly recently that it's opened up, and we have some other competitors.
yeah. I mean,
All right.
upcoming events. We're co-throwing or throwing a party at Amazon reInvent or AWS reInvent down in Vegas. I think we're supplying the magician for the party. But yeah, we're partnering with one of our partners for the party event. It's going to be at the Cosmopolitan. It's going to be at one of those super clubs. I can't wait. I'll bring my earplugs.
Yeah.
So, but yep, that's about it.
Yeah. Well,
Unless you want to do a part 2, we can go deep dive into a bunch of crazy industry topics that never
yeah.
really discussed because
No, it's been,
because everybody's afraid of what was said and what's going to be said.
right.
I'm not afraid.
No, I mean, I had I really enjoyed the conversation, so I'd love to do this again.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well,
you.
thank you so much, Garrick. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
That's our show. I'd like to thank Garrick for coming on the show. Also, I'd like to encourage everyone to please give us a rating on iTunes. Those 5-star ratings really help out the show. And thank our sponsor, Greenlight Design. Remember to mention the Good Data podcast to get that free assessment. Our music is algorithmically created by JukeDeck. Check them out. Try it at jukedeck.com. JUKECK.com. For Good Data, I'm Drew Farnsworth. We'll talk to you next time on the podcast.